all you glorious gamers out there. Welcome to the PlayersToo Podcast, the video game podcast for gamers like you, by gamers like you. You can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really helps us out. It does a huge amount for the exposure of the show. And while you're over there, if you could leave us a little review as well, again, that just helps us out even more. And if you're someone that's already done that for us, thank you so much. You're an absolute legend. To everyone else, it really does only take you 5 seconds, and we would really appreciate it. Alright, and on with the show. My name is Mark Henderson. With me, as always, Mr. Lewis Camley. How's it going, Lewis?
Going very well, Mark. Good to see you as ever. How you getting on?
Not bad at all. Working as ever, but who isn't, Lewis? Let's talk about some video games, though. What have you been playing?
Well, Mark, I've not had a ton of time for gaming this week just because, well, as you know, but our listeners won't, I am moving house this week, so a lot of
exciting stuff. Big moves for Lewis.
Yeah, I'm exhausted and quite terrified. But apart from that, I've managed to fit in a little bit of time with Resident Evil 7.
Nice.
Yeah, which I've been playing basically to get ready for Resident Evil 8 Village because I had never played 7 before, and you know, you're just off the back of it and you were praising it quite highly, so I thought now's the time just to get through it. And again, not having a lot of time, it's quite a short game overall, so it's kind of worked quite well for that. Although it has meant that I've had to play it quite late at night most of the time, which isn't always ideal. But
how are you finding it though? How are you finding like that tension and the horror aspect of it all?
Overall, I'm really enjoying the game. Before we started here, I was like, well, how would I sum this up? And it's like, it's definitely got some flaws, and it's got some, as you were pointing out, like there's definitely elements of it that feel that they were designed for VR and that don't necessarily translate the best. But
yeah, totally.
Across the whole package, I mean, I think it's got scares, it's got atmosphere galore. That's the main thing about it. I think it's more atmospheric than pretty much any RE game that I've played. It's got good boss encounters, good puzzles, nothing's overly challenging. The combat is kind of fine. It's not asking a great deal of you, but it's pushing you to your limits at times. There's certainly been some encounters with the Molded, who are kind of the zombie creatures that are in it, that I've found quite tricky at times, just in terms of having enough resources and kind of being prepared for that.
Definitely. I think the difficulty almost comes from resource management rather than like the enemies being particularly difficult or anything like that, you know?
Absolutely, yeah. And it's just, you know, it's making sure you land your headshot. That's the kind of key skill of the whole game. You know?
If you're not aiming for the head, what are you even doing, you know?
Yeah, I think you can kind of bring them down by shooting their legs out and stuff. But yeah, there's not a lot of puzzle in terms of really working out what you need to do, but there's just a lot of what I find oddly enjoyable kind of busy work when you're halfway through doing something and you have to retreat to your save room and tidy up and work it out and go back out and make sure that you're thinking like, well, I'm probably quite near a boss encounter here, so I want to make sure I bring enough ammo, but I also need to leave space because I know I'm going to be picking up this thing. Like, all of that stuff is just so classic RE. I mean, I really have been very impressed by the atmosphere, the style of the game, the switch to first person, which I was a bit hesitant about because I don't love a lot of first-person shooting games, generally speaking. I don't play a lot of first-person games.
I mean, I do like those types of games, and I was a bit hesitant about it.
And I think there's some things that are lost. Like, I really miss the agility that you have, particularly in Resident Evil 2 Remake is what I'm thinking of, and Resident Evil 3 Remake, to be fair. I don't feel like you can kind of get away from enemies as easily in first-person as you can in third. And obviously, the big impact is in the character of Ethan Winters, who is just awful, really. He's a boring non-character, I think.
He sort of is, man. I never really thought about that, but he's a bit faceless.
Yeah.
I don't mean that just because you don't literally get to see his face, but he's a bit personalityless as well, isn't he? Yeah.
Totally. And you can see why for a VR game, like, he's just a cipher for us, and that's why this week online, because of RE8 Village, there's been a lot made of how much damage Ethan's hands take in both games. and you can see why that is. Like, they have turned a character into basically a set of hands that have experiences because you are supposed to feel like you're him. But it does mean at times you're just like, why is this guy so stupid? Or why is he so kind of unmoved by what is happening around him? You know, he's often having these absolutely horrendous encounters with monsters and whatever else. There was a bit I played last night after one of the encounters with Lucas, Lucas, one of the family members, and he sort of says to Lucas, like, if you've not got any more tricks up your sleeve, then you better do what I say. And you're like, would a person really react like this, having gone through the absolute mental torture that he's just gone through, you know? But I'm setting all that aside because it just basically doesn't matter. You're never playing Resident Evil for really richly drawn characters. It's always a bit goofy and a bit camp, and I think it's just got bags of atmosphere. It's got great scares. I think that the family and the house are really fantastic additions to the series.
Yeah, they're really great bad guys. Like, see, for as much as Ethan Winters, let's face it, is a bit fucking boring.
Yeah.
Like, see the family as bad guys, like everyone around Jack, really spot on, really great.
Absolutely, yeah. They're the kind of key characters. The house, or the various houses that you encounter, are almost characters in themselves. It feels oppressive, it feels dark, it's scary. It's got some fantastic, quite surprising set pieces, like the first boss fight that you have with Jack. It involves a car. I mean, I died a few times there because I was just not really sure what I was supposed to be doing, and then but you kind of puzzle it all out as you go, and you're like, there's a lot happening here that I'm finding really enjoyable. So I think I'm about 3/4 of the way through. It shouldn't take me too much longer to finish. As long as I get some time in between moving in the next few days, I should be finished next week and ready to jump into Village.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Has this got you excited for Village?
Yeah, I was kind of excited for Village anyway, and I'd played one of the demos, but having now experienced it in first person and had some time with it, and hoping that it builds on that. I mean, I do know that it changes the formula a little bit. It's gone back to a slightly more action-y focus, which, we'll talk about a bit later anyway. But
in fact, Lewis, see, to be honest with you, I don't know why we're holding off on talking about the fact that Resident Evil Village came out this week. So we're going completely off the rails.
Whoa.
We're taking one of our shout-outs from later on the show. We're doing it right now. So Resident Evil Village has come out this week. Currently sitting with an 84 on Metacritic, an 82 on Series X, an 85 on PC. A lot has been made, actually, of the point that I know that you were just about to make, Lewis, and I'll let you get back to this, and that it has become less scary than Resident Evil 7, which was quite intense and, as you said, very atmospheric and very tense atmosphere that was built there, and it has gone more towards an action-focused game, again, like more in the vein of RE4 action rather than RE6 action, e.g. it's good.
Yeah.
And I seen that the game was actually described as RE4 meets RE7, which to me sounds like a very, very good thing. That's not a bad thing in the slightest. But yeah, I mean, does the fact that the new game is more action focused than this game, is that a good thing for you? Do you think that'll make much difference to your enjoyment of it?
I don't think it'll make too much difference because, I really like the action-y elements of some of the other ones, and, particularly 2 and 3 remakes. They're not as action-y as 4 was necessarily, but they're still quite action-heavy at times, and I'm hoping that there's some balance across all of that now going into 8. But the thing that I'm really hoping that they carry forward is more that the structure of 7. I really like the sense that there are kind of these multiple bosses, and they each feel like a slightly different version of horror. Jack is very intense, it's kind of heavy metal horror, it's chainsaws, it's chaos, whereas Marguerite is much more, I don't even know what the word would be to describe it, but just kind of really horrible, disgusting, everything's bugs, it's slithering around,
Yeah, it's a bit more gross, right? That's her sort of vibe, yeah.
And quite sort of supernatural, and then Lucas is a lot more kind of like Saw, basically, that kind of thing. It's sort of traps
painfully
and intelligence.
Like Saw.
Yeah,
painfully like
a little too much like Saw.
Wee bit on the nose, that one, I've got to admit.
And from what I've heard about 8 and read about 8 in the last few days, I think it sort of mirrors that. There's kind of like 4 or 5 big bosses, and they each have a slightly different theme. So obviously we've seen the tall vampire lady, and she's got that whole thing going on, but I've seen hints that actually some of the other people that we've not seen much of in any of the promo materials are really quite interesting sections. So that's what I'm most excited about. If it's got a bit more gunplay, that's fine by me,
Absolutely, man. Like, I'm really excited for it. I'm really excited for RE8 now, I've got to say. Not just because of all the reviews that have come out that I've got a chance to read, and the fact that this game is more action focused than RE7 is no bad thing for me. That is no bad thing for me in the slightest. Apologies, ladies and gentlemen, there seems to be 2 dogs fighting outside of my window right now for some reason. But listen, I'm going to move on to what I've been playing. I know you've not asked me, but I'm just going to move on anyway. I'm on a roll here because I've been playing Returnal, and I'm actually quite excited to talk about it. I'm more excited to talk about it than I was thinking that I was going to be honest.
Nice, yeah. I've been really excited to hear your thoughts on it.
Well, as you know, this game is a roguelike, and if you listened to our show last week when our PlayAlong game was FTL, I had a lot of negative things to say about roguelikes, and then immediately started playing another one. But, well, I just want to start from the top here. This game looks, like, visually stunningly good. It looks fantastic. I think that what the game is doing with the haptic feedback in the controller and with the 3D audio, for various reasons that I can't be bothered going into right now, I've been playing a lot of my games recently with headphones on.
Oh, nice.
And that 3D audio is something else, like really, really impressive. On the DualSense as well, these haptic triggers that they have actually been used really cleverly. So the way that it works with your gun is that you have a primary fire and you have an alternate fire. And the way that that works is that you hold the trigger down just normally, like just a more gentle press, so that the trigger only goes in about halfway, and then that's your primary fire, and then you press it in all the way against the resistance of the haptic feedback to use your alternate fire. And this isn't something I've really heard talked about, to be honest, around Returnal. But that is an incredible use of the triggers, because I can see your face a little bit here on my webcam, Lewis, and I don't think that necessarily sat very well with you.
Yeah.
But it just works. Like, it just does work, and it means that you don't have to be flicking around, pressing other buttons, using the D-pad or whatever, flicking to an alternate controller. It's just all there in the trigger. You're effectively using that trigger as 2 buttons now.
Yeah.
And it just worked really, really well. Like, really well. And I'm just thinking, well, if this is one of the first games that's out that's really utilising stuff like this, I'm thinking, man, this could be something really impressive in the future, you know? So that really impressed me as well. The game in and of itself, honestly, is pretty excellent. Like, the moment-to-moment gameplay is really great, super dynamic. I actually feel that is really important for a roguelike. I think my thing with FTL was that it felt very samey. It felt as if we were doing the same thing again and again and again and again and again. Whereas in Returnal, I don't feel like that so much, even though I obviously am doing the same thing over and over and over again. But because each fight is different, because each area feels fresher, I don't know, I'm not getting bored as quickly, basically. Keeping in mind, I've only done 5 or 6 runs, but the runs are quite long as well. I actually managed to get past the second boss now, so I don't need to fight the second boss anymore. I can just bypass him to get onto the third biome relatively easily. However, what I will say, and this is a thing that has been reported a lot online, it is absolutely... Quite frankly, it's ridiculous that this game doesn't have any save functionality.
Yeah.
It is ludicrous. Absolutely ludicrous. It's sort of happened to me twice now. When I was playing it the other night, I was sort of thinking to myself, oh, I've died here, but I don't want to start another run because it's sort of pointless. Like, I was going to my bed relatively soon, and I was just like, there's no point in me starting again now. So I just had to turn it off, and I just watched TV for a bit and then went to bed. Do you know what I mean? Because I was just like, there's no point in starting another run. And then the last run that I had was the opposite. I was like, oh, I've got really far here, actually, and I need to go to my bed now. It's 1 a.m, and I've got work tomorrow, and I need to go to bed now. I can't save this. Like, I can't do anything, you know? So either I just leave my PlayStation on rest mode until I come back to it, which, let's face it, isn't ideal, or I just sort of pushed on half-heartedly and eventually died, which is what happened. To be honest with you, it's ridiculous. It's absolutely ridiculous that this game doesn't have a save function. I know that Housemarque have said that they have heard this criticism, so hopefully that means that there is a solution coming to that. But quite genuinely, for me, it is a horrible oversight and is actually quite disrespectful of gamers' time, I feel. Because to run all the way to the end, like to do a full run and complete the game, is going to be like multiple hours. Like, it's not just like a couple hour FTL run. Like, I would say that a full run, collecting resources all the way, even skipping boss fights, it can't be less than like 4 or 5 hours. God, that you need to be sitting there constantly without having saved your game, you know? Yeah,
and that's to actually finish it. I mean, that worries me in a sense.
To be honest with you, Lewis, it could be the barrier that makes me not finish this game.
Yeah, I can totally imagine that would be the case for me as well, because as much as I might grind and put in a lot of hours and really be loving it, it is pretty rare for me that I have a clear 6+ hours to just sit and play one game with no prospect of saving. And that fear as well of, you come to the end of a night and you're in the middle of a run that's going quite well, and do you just give up on it, or do you, as you say, like, I think that inevitably you push on, but in the back of your mind you're saying to yourself, it's okay if I die because I have to go to bed, and then you're not trying as hard and it's not really the experience that you're after, you know? So I really hope that they patch something in around that, because people might complain that it's against what a roguelike is about, but I just think that's nonsense.
No, it's not, because you can do it in such a manner like FTL where the save only functions one time. Like, you can't reload the save again and again and again. You can find some workaround for that. I mean, the people at Housemarque are smart people. Like, there has to be a workaround for that, you know? It is insane that they've not come up for a solution for that. Like, genuinely, man, it really is. It's a bad obstacle that they should really sort out. It really is.
How have you been finding the difficulty, just really quickly?
It's okay so far. It's not easy. I'm not going to lie to you. It's not easy at all. For me, so far, it's been fine. However, as I said, I've only just got to the third biome. Well, actually, to be honest, I actually got most of the way through the third biome, and it was fine, and ended up getting into a stupid situation where the game basically fucked me, which is something that can happen in roguelikes, which very much annoys me. But that did happen, and then I died, and that is just something that can happen in the game, you know what I mean? And it's up to you to get better at that point, you know, and hope that your loadout when you get into situations like that is good enough that you can deal with them, you know? But in terms of the actual difficulty, it's hard, it's not too hard, is what I would say.
Good. That's what I like to hear.
Alright, listen, on that note, time for the news. Alright, listen, news item number 1. There have been rumours that a redesigned PlayStation 5 will enter production in 2022. This comes from Taiwanese site DigiTimes, which claims that suppliers are planning to start the production of this redesigned PS5 between Q2 and Q3 next year, presumably so that you would then have the units to sell in the holiday season of 2022. DigiTimes have said the redesigned PlayStation 5 will have a new semi-customised 6nm CPU from AMD. All of those words, I definitely know what they mean, Lewis. But I do definitely know that this will be more powerful and more efficient. It is unclear, however, how far this quote's redesign will go, only 2 years into the PlayStation 5's life cycle. VGC's Tom Ivan says it's likely that the design is purely component focused and won't feature any significant external changes, whereas Forbes' Eric Kane does liken the redesign to a PlayStation 5 Pro. In relation to the PS5's supply issues, of which this is sort of spun out from, Sony FCO Hiroki Totokai has said this.
As I said earlier, we're aiming for more sales volume than the PS4 during year 2. But can we drastically increase the supply? No, that's not likely. The shortage of semiconductors is one factor, but there are other factors that will impact on the production volume. So at present, we'd like to aim at beating second year sales of 14.8 million, which was the second year of PS4. And then when asked specifically about the global shortage of semiconductors, he added, for example, we could find maybe a secondary resource, or by changing the design, we could cope.
So from that statement, it seems to me anyway, very much like this is purely a component/supply focused redesign. Not unlike what we've seen happen to the Switch in 2019, which was 2 years into its launch. I don't know if anyone's aware of this, but the initial OG run of Switches had basically a very slight update in 2019, which made battery life better, made the processor run a bit more efficiently. So it was better, but it was nothing that you had to rush out and upgrade your Switch for, you know what I mean? Performance in terms of how it runs games and whatever was largely the same, and I would have thought that this PlayStation 5 redesign would be much more in that vein rather than a PlayStation 5 Pro. I do think a PlayStation 5 Pro is coming down the line at some point. I do not think it is this, though.
Yeah, better not be this. That's my take on it. I mean, this goes back to one of the things that I was quite hesitant about getting a PlayStation 5 at launch. If you go back and listen to our episodes back then, we had a few conversations at that point about should we go out and buy it right away. One of the things that I was worried about was that they would quite quickly bring out a better model, and people like us who had adopted it straight away would feel a bit hard done by. Now, I'm of the mind that this is just a small internal changes, probably to get around component shortages.
Yeah, well, we also know that Sony have said as well that the shortage of PlayStation 5 is likely to stretch well into 2022 now as well.
Yeah.
So I think that this is very much to alleviate that rather than because they need an update in some capacity, you know?
Yeah, I mean, it would be ridiculous to be telling people who haven't been able to buy a console for a year that here's a new upgrade for the console that you couldn't buy, you know? And then to put everyone who did manage to get one out of joint by telling them that there's already an improvement. You know, we've not seen any of the power really of this console be tapped yet. You know, there's been a handful of fully exclusive next generation games on it. So, yeah, I think anyone sitting with a PS5 just now, do not fear. This is very likely just going to make it easier for your friends to get it, which is a good thing, you know?
Absolutely. Like I said, it will probably be slightly more powerful. It will run probably more efficiently. It will be slightly better, but this is absolutely nothing. Or I certainly doubt it will be anything worth going out and upgrading over, you know. Definitely not. And I do not think that there will be an external redesign in any capacity. This will be entirely internal, entirely components based, entirely around what they can fucking get their hands on. All right, Lewis, news item number 2, and sticking with Sony, they are being sued over PlayStation's digital store monopoly. So this is obviously happening in the shadow of the Epic versus Apple lawsuit as well, which deals with very similar issues around antitrust and anti-competition. Basically, this seems to boil down to the fact that Sony previously allowed you to buy digital download codes from third parties, e.g. Amazon, Game if you're here in the UK, GameStop if you're in the US, retailers like that. But this stopped in 2019 when PlayStation made digital download codes only available through the PlayStation Store. As such, the lawsuit claims that this means that Sony have a monopoly on digital games sold on the PlayStation platform, which, to be fair, they absolutely do, Lewis. The lawsuit claims that this monopoly allows Sony to sell digital games at super competitive prices, much higher than their physical counterparts in a competitive retail market, and much higher than they could sell them otherwise in a competitive market for digital games as well, which again is true. The lawyers have also claimed that popular games sell for, on average, 75% more on the PlayStation Store than physical copies, and that number could be as high as 175% more than physical games. Now, Lewis, this has long been a bugbear of mine, so we're going to try not have a massive rant about this, right? However, removing the manufacturing process from game releases should result in games being both cheaper for consumers and more profitable for the platform holders. Not just more profitable for the platform holders, you know what I mean? These savings that are made by not having to produce physical copies of these games never seem to be passed to consumers. Often buying a game straight from the PlayStation Store is by far the most expensive way that you can buy that game. I also think that in the year of our Lord 2021, Lewis, when sustainability and the impact of these big companies like Sony are having on our fucking planet, we should be encouraged to buy digital copies rather than buying physical copies, which is exactly the opposite of what PlayStation are doing. And let's face it as well, like, this is an expensive hobby, so I'm not trying to, like, get on my fucking ethical high horse here, do you know what I mean? This is an expensive hobby, and choosing to buy physical copies rather than digital copies is a completely justified position, specifically because it is by far the most economical way to be a gamer, is to continue to buy physical copies of games. You can get deals on them, you have access to the secondary market. It is by far the cheapest way to be a gamer. And this is basically the reason why I, and I know that you're the same, Lewis, never even considered buying a digital PlayStation 5. I am pretty comfortable that I have probably already made up the difference by buying physical games than I would have done being forced to buy digital games from the PlayStation Store only, you know? I am very much on the side of the lawyers in this situation and hope that Sony are forced to open up their digital marketplace. However, if I was to play devil's advocate here, versus what Epic are going through with Apple, Sony do sell this hardware at a loss, so they may be using that as justification, although, in my opinion, you can never really justify a monopoly, I don't think. And on the PlayStation platform, there is the option to buy physical copies, obviously, so the PlayStation Store isn't your only option, unless, of course, you've bought a digital-only PlayStation 5, in which case they do have a literal monopoly over all of your purchases. Lewis, thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything that you're saying there, Mark. I have the similar bugbear with this shift towards the all-digital storefront that we're seeing. Yeah, because it's never worked out in the interests of the consumers, certainly in the UK. I get the feeling that pricing in the US is a bit different because you do seem to find that people prefer to buy digitally a lot, but over here it is every single time, without doubt, you can buy a physical copy of the game cheaper than you will find it on the PlayStation Store. Definitely. And then on top of that, it's pretty rare that games reduce in price at all on the PlayStation Store. Like, don't get me wrong, there are sales, there are almost constantly sales of some description, whether it's indies or whether it's, you know, PS4 hits or whatever it might be. But in terms of just, this game has been out for 3 or 4 months and would naturally have come down a bit in price in a physical realm, That never happens on the PlayStation Store. And then when you throw in that, well, two things, that the whole physical marketplace for games is collapsing, you know, in terms of brick and mortar shops are going away. We're seeing the slow death of all of that. So your options are being reduced completely outside of your own ability to affect that. You could imagine a world where in 5 years' time, if this lawsuit weren't to be successful, that if you're buying a PlayStation game, you might only really have the option of buying it digitally from PlayStation at full price or physically from Amazon at full price, and those will be your only options, and neither of them leave me feeling particularly great. And to chuck in on top of that, obviously the year that we've just had, or are still having really, in terms of the pandemic, has meant that a lot of people couldn't get to physical game stores of any description either. Absolutely. Or even trade games among their friends. And so the fact that your digital marketplace is monopolised and expensive, I have a lot of issues with that. It is my number one concern for the collapse of physical game stores. Isn't that I'm some holdout for the physicality of these things. It's simply that the better deal is always there in my experience.
Yeah, and I think access to the secondary market as well is important, both in terms of trading games in and getting some money back from your purchases, and the ability for people that cannot afford to buy these games, even at a discounted price, can buy second-hand games, you know what I mean, and do have access to a lot of titles that they might not otherwise have access to. Also, second-hand stores like that, particularly here in the UK, like have a lot of old games, basically, which you just don't see a lot in terms of physical copies, you know, and sometimes you just can't get hold of them unless you're buying it on eBay or something like that, you know, which is something that is good. PlayStation need to do better. Like, PlayStation need to do better on all these fronts, I think, and if they can be forced to legally open up their PlayStation digital marketplace in the same way that Epic are trying to get Apple to open up their digital marketplace that they are monopolising on their iOS devices, I think that this is a win all round for everyone involved, all consumers. Alright, let's news item number 3. Ubisoft are rebranding all of their in-house developed games as Ubisoft Originals. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, do Ubisoft publish any other games that they don't develop themselves? No, not really. No, not really is the answer to that. They do not publish any major games that they don't develop. So, for me, at least at this specific point in time, Lewis, this rebranding does seem a little bit redundant. This first cropped up when Ubisoft announced the Division Heartland, which is a free-to-play game set in the Division universe, which is planned for release in the incredibly vague window of 2021/2022 for PlayStation, Xbox and PC, which is also developed by Ubisoft's in-house team Red Storm Entertainment, who had previously worked on the Ghost Recon series and more recently have been a support studio on Far Cry and the Division series of late. So, Lewis, firstly, the speculation around the rebrand is that Ubisoft may start to publish other games that they didn't themselves develop. And I think most people, including you and I probably, immediately go to, oh, well, are they going to start publishing indie games? Which isn't an area that Ubisoft have a big presence in. So that would be a good thing for them to do as far as I'm concerned. We also know from earnings calls last year that Ubisoft want to diversify the types of games that they are making, and they want to take a step back from relying so heavily on AAA big smash hit releases, you know. Do you think that this is a sign that Ubisoft could be taking steps in that direction?
I think it must be a sign of that, basically, yeah. I mean, first and foremost, if it is literally just a marketing rebrand, it doesn't really make any sense to me. Like, it's quite a prestige label to give your products. When you think of something like an HBO original or something like that, right? That's kind of...
Netflix original.
Yeah, exactly. Like, it kind of...
Shine's going to come off that a wee bit though, isn't it?
Well, yeah, it depends what you're watching, I suppose. But yeah, there's something in that term that is used quite a lot in kind of marketing circles, and I don't really see why Ubisoft would have to do it, because Ubisoft's games probably more than any other publisher in the industry have a look and a feel about them that is uniform across all titles, pretty much.
But I think that's what they're trying to break, right? That's what they are trying to fly in the face of now, because they have this homogenous feel across all their games to the point that they feel quite samey, which they themselves have now identified as a problem, right?
Exactly that. So if they're looking to move away from that, and it seems like even today they reiterated on an earnings call that they are looking to step away from AAA titles, or as many AAA titles as they currently do. So yeah, if they're looking to diversify in that way, then suddenly that term does become quite important, because you can start to say these are our kind of core franchises, these are effectively Ubisoft Studios games, and then there'll be some other stuff that's coming out of this publishing house that doesn't quite fit that mould and looks a bit different, and that might be indies. That feels like the most natural thing, and I honestly think that Immortals Phoenix Rising is a bit of a clue to a lot of this, because that felt like a bit of a different scale when it was first announced and as it was developed, and I wonder if they're starting to look at having smaller, kind of slightly more artsy experiences come out of their publishing studio, but not necessarily built by the teams who make Assassin's Creed or The Division or those types of games. So I hope it's that, and it's a move towards indie publishing. I hope it's not just that they're going to start publishing a lot of mobile games or something like that. I mean, as part of a bigger portfolio, then that's great, but something about moving into AA or indie publishing of external studios, I think would be really great to see from Ubisoft, who've had a lot of reputational problems in the last year or so as well. Like, they could really do with looking like the good guys in the gaming industry again, which, they are not as bad in some ways in terms of crunch as other studios seem to be, but they have had quite a lot of misconduct scandals and stuff like that over the last wee while. So this could be a big move, a big change in what they are all about, and it would be quite interesting to see. It
absolutely would be, and I think that Ubisoft is actually lagging behind a lot of these other big publishing houses in gaming, in terms of how they support indies, and that they basically don't very much, I mean, if EA is putting you to shame, they've got their own indies wing of their publishing, do you know what I mean? And
called EA Originals, by the way.
Exactly, yeah. I would love to see Ubisoft do something similar. Like, I think it should be mandated somewhere that if you are a publisher of a certain size, you should be developing or helping support 5 indie studios at any one time.
Yeah, I think something like that would be a great idea, honestly.
The second thing to come up here, I suppose, is that Ubisoft are really trying to make the Division stick around list. They really, really are. We now have this free-to-play standalone game. We got an announcement that they're doing more new content for The Division 2. There's a mobile game on the horizon. They're writing a fucking novel. They've got a Netflix series on the way as well, which I completely forgot was a thing, and that Jake Gyllenhaal was apparently attached to it. I'm not even sure I knew about that. That's madness. But we also know from the same earnings calls last year that The Division 2 underperformed for Ubisoft, and that, along with another bunch of games that underperformed, I think Ghost Recon, and I think there was another couple of things underperformed for them all at the one time, basically, caused Ubisoft to rethink this strategy going forward in the first place. Do you ever see The Division, specifically The Division 2, I suppose, but like The Division as a franchise sort of getting its Rainbow Six Siege resurgence at any point?
I don't think the existing games will have that moment at all. I mean, the first game was successful enough, it felt to me. There was enough buzz around that and support for it. I think that there's still something within the DNA of The Division, and it might just be that they need to do a Division 3 and maybe, I don't know, just vary the gameplay a bit or expand its world a bit or something like that. I'm not really sure why The Division 2 didn't stick in quite the way that the first game did, or certainly that Rainbow Six Siege did. It felt fine and it was reasonably well liked, it felt like at the time, but it just didn't break the world in any sense. So I do think that they would be daft to just completely abandon The Division as a series, but probably if this new game or a full Division 3, if they don't quite land, then maybe it's time to look. I mean, it's time they looked a bit beyond Tom Clancy, quite frankly.
Yeah, I think it is, to be honest. I think that Ubisoft would probably do well to look elsewhere. Unless it's Splinter Cell, they should definitely bring back Splinter Cell. Alright, listen, news item number 4. Nintendo have announced Game Builder Garage, which has been described by IGN as a cross between Labo and Dreams. Basically, this is a game about making games, and as a result, sort of programming as well. But basically, it seems like a very stripped back version of Dreams, certainly in terms of its interface anyway. However, it seems as though you can still make quite an impressive variety of games, considering it looks very... And I was struggling for a word here, but it looks a bit juvenile. Is that fair to say, Liz?
Yeah, I think it's supposed to be quite kind of simple, like your first entry into this world sort of thing.
Exactly, it's supposed to be easy to get your head around. But it looks as if you can like design your own sort of basic sprites and things like that as well. So it does have a level of depth there, do you know what I mean? We saw And just the wee trailer, which again we'll link to over on the show notes at PlayersToo.com, but like 2D games, 3D games, racing games. I think there was even a fighting game in there very briefly.
Yeah, there was.
You know, I think that when you see this announcement, you either think, oh, that's pretty cool, that's quite interesting, or you roll your eyes so hard and say, I have absolutely no interest in that whatsoever, you know? It also feels like games similar to this come along fairly regularly these days. Thinking in sort of recent history, specifically about Nintendo and PlayStation, you've got Little Big Planet and Dreams, and then you've got Labo, and then previously you had like Mario Maker and stuff like that. And it feels like only one of them really caught on in a big way, and that was Mario Maker. And the reason for that is because it's fucking Mario. And also, it's not really about designing a game, it's about designing a Mario level, you know, it's a different thing to a certain extent, I suppose. But games like this, Liz, what do you think about games like this in general? And I suppose, what do you think about this one specifically?
In general, I think that they're great. I think there should be space in the marketplace for a lot of different types of game like this as well. Like having your Dreams, which feels like a full game design toolkit, essentially. You know, it's basically like having an engine that you can play around with. Down to like something like this, which feels a lot closer to introducing people to programming, probably getting younger people than us involved in programming and connecting that to game design as well. So not just, you know, your if statements from computing studies when you're in school, but, you know, attaching it to something a bit more substantial than that. I think it's great. I mean, I really wish that Dreams had been better supported and had kind of become a much bigger thing. But the fact that a lot of companies do keep making these games shows that there's enough interest out there for how all of this stuff that we love comes together. You know, we all kind of want to know a bit more about it, or a lot of people do at least. But they are struggling, I guess, to really kind of land and be long-term successful outside of a niche audience that wants that specifically. This one in particular, looks like a Nintendo take on that formula, basically. You know, and it's right up their street. It will probably play quite well on the Switch. I was quite impressed by the variety, as you say, that we saw in the trailer, because at the beginning of the trailer, I was thinking, this is just a slightly more elaborate Mario Maker, isn't it? But by the end, you see a lot of different types of things. So I'm sure it won't really land, but, you know, it's fine. It's good that they're doing it, I think.
Yeah, I sort of agree. I'm sort of glad that games like this exist out there.
Yeah.
I actually think that it's really good that Nintendo specifically are doing something like this that's very directly, no, this is a game about how you make games, you know? Because I think that they have, well, to be honest with you, a younger audience, and perhaps people that when they engage with this in 20 years' time are designing the next thing that we're playing, you know?
Yeah.
Alright, let's finish off as we always do with a couple of shout-outs, skipping right over shout-out number 1, which was Resident Evil, and we done that at the top of the show. But also out this week, Liz, was Subnautica Below Zero. And in fact, the reviews were dropping just as we were recording this. It's currently sitting with an 84 on the PlayStation 5, an 84 on the Series X, and an 82 on PC. That genuinely could have changed quite significantly by the time you look at the reviews, but that is what it's currently sitting at. Basically, it seems like more Subnautica with a bit more narrative thrown in there, which seems pretty cool to me. This was a bit of a sleeper hit when it first burst onto the scene, you know? And it seems like if you like the original, you're going to like this one as well. Are you getting any interest in this, Lewis? It seems to be more up your street than it is mine, thinking of the fact that you really loved The Outer Wilds, and this is at least, I don't know, adjacent to that, I suppose.
Yeah, it's sort of like an adventure survival type thing. I mean, it's really popular among certain parts of the gaming community. It's the kind of game that I would love to give a try to, and it was just given away recently on the PlayStation Play at Home scheme. So
yeah,
a lot of
this is the first game. The first game.
The first game. Yeah. So coming on to the new one, I think if it's just building on that, particularly if it's got more story, that is the kind of thing that would draw me towards it. I might go and play the original to see how I feel about it, because the one thing that puts me off, and we were talking about this just off air as well, is that it's a game largely about swimming and being underwater, and those are routinely the worst bits of any video game. So
worst mechanics in all video games, like being underwater. Yep.
I almost want to play the first game, maybe the second game, just to see if that's any good, because, you know, you just read its scores out. It's reviewing well, so something about swimming must be okay, but I'm keen to know what that is.
Maybe the folks over at Subnautica have just cracked it.
Yeah, maybe,
discovered exactly how to do swimming in video games. Alright, let's shout out number 3. It seems that Don't Nod may be moving away from the Life is Strange series. CEO Oscar Gilbert has said, "Never say never, but for the moment it's not our strategy. We want to create our own IP, that's what we want to do." The next installment in the Life is Strange series, True Colour, which was announced not that long ago, is being developed by Deck 9, who also developed Before the Storm, which was a really, really great game as well. So I think that the series is in good hands, but basically he went on to say that they want to own their own IP, and that they feel like that is an important part of their future as a studio. He also specifically mentioned that they don't want to be known as the Life is Strange studio, but I mean, I don't know, they got a lot of acclaim for doing that. It seems that there's worse things to be known by. Apparently they had also refused several proposed acquisitions in order to stay independent and maintain their identity in the sort of games that they make and the sort of topics that they cover. I think was specifically quite important to them. But they are now in a deal with Tencent, or have been partly bought by Tencent, as Tencent seem to have their fingers in many pies, so to speak.
They do.
But this has all come from a couple of articles from Rebecca Valentine over at IGN, both of which we'll link to over in the show notes at PlayersToo.com. Very interesting read. But if Don't Nod have bigger ambitions than a sort of Life is Strange-esque game, I know that they've sort of dabbled with AA development, we will say, with Vampire. And if they want to go even beyond that, still, man, I'm 100% behind them. They're a fantastic studio.
Yeah, they've definitely earned the right to go and do whatever they want to do next. And if that isn't Life is Strange, as you say, a hugely critically acclaimed game, an important game for gaming and also for that studio. But, you know, there comes a point where you don't want to be typecast, and maybe they've just reached that point, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's totally justified, to be completely honest with you. Although I was joking about there's worse things to be known for than Life is Strange, you know, because that was such an acclaimed series. But if they have higher ambitions than a game of that scope, then fair play to them. Alright, and final shout out, number 4, Lewis. Epic have apparently offered Sony at least $200 million for 4 to 6 games to be exclusively released on the Epic Games Store. This is another tidbit that has come from the Epic versus Apple lawsuit, and I think that we're just going to be getting wee bits here and there. Yeah. A fallout from this for weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks and weeks. It was also shown that Epic had talks with Microsoft, but basically they now view them as a competitor now with Games Pass on PC, and hilariously they were also wanting to start conversations with Nintendo, but themselves described it as a moonshot and a non-starter, and well, no shit. Currently, both PlayStation games that have come out on PC, which is Horizon Zero Dawn and Days Gone, which is just coming out next week, I believe, both have come to Steam. So Sony have perhaps turned down this offer. But what I think that we can take away from offers like that and the money that is being put on the table for PlayStation, and the fact that PlayStation are clearly receptive to offers like these now, is that more games, more PlayStation exclusive games are coming to PC, which I hope is good news for PC gamers. And the fact for a certain subsect of PC gamers, I'm sure it is good that they are not coming exclusively to the Epic Games Store.
Yeah, another really fascinating tidbit coming out of this court case. There's so much happening there. It's worth just keeping an eye on gaming Twitter over the next few weeks to keep up with that, because there's a lot more than we could possibly cover that's just kind of interesting little snippets. Yeah, an interesting offer for Epic to make to Sony. It does seem like it's been turned down. You know, it shows an intent, I think, from Epic. A lot of this is showing Epic's massive intent to crack into this market. They are not backing down from spending considerable sums of money to take on Steam. So yeah, it could be a really interesting future on PC.
Yeah, definitely. Could be, man. Definitely. All right, Liz. And with that, time for a beer, and then we'll be back with Topic of the Week. And we are back for Topic of the Week. Topic of the Week this week is a look back at 6 months of the next-gen consoles, Liz.
It is indeed, Mark. Yeah, we are somehow 6 months into the first year of the life of both the PlayStation 5 and the Xbox Series consoles. Xbox launched globally on November 10th, and the PS5 launched in some regions on November 12th, and then a week later here in Europe on November 19th. We've both had a PlayStation 5 since roughly December, I think I'm right in saying, just a couple of weeks after the launch happened. So yeah, 5-6 months of PlayStation 5 ownership for us. So yeah, we're doing a bit of a mid-year report card, I guess, on how well the two consoles have been doing in terms of their games, their services, the experience of playing the consoles themselves, and, you know, everything to do with how that first 6 months has gone. So to kick it off, Mark, what's your overall thoughts on the new generation consoles so far? What's been a big success for you?
What's been a big success for me? Well, loading times have been a big success for me, Liz. But in general, we're talking PlayStation and Xbox here. What PlayStation have done well is what PlayStation always do well, which is deliver very good exclusive games on their platform. What Xbox have done well is continue to double down and make Games Pass just ludicrously good value for money. That is what the two platforms have done extremely well in the first 6 months. I think that one of those strategies is more conducive to selling units than the other, but one is no less valuable than the other depending on what sort of gaming you do.
Yeah, I think that's really important to start off this discussion by kind of framing it as two entirely different approaches to a next generation console launch is what we saw from PlayStation and Xbox, and obviously PlayStation has focused much more on the game side. And if you look at that just in terms of Sony first party exclusives over the first few months of this life cycle, you're talking about Sackboy, you're talking about Astro,
Spider-Man, Demon's Souls,
yeah.
Returnal now, we're on the door of Ratchet and Clank.
Absolutely, yeah. So you're looking at a really stacked lineup there of completely different types of games. You know, Spider-Man does cross generations, I suppose, but I think for the purposes of this, we can think of it as a next generation game, so tied to the launch of the PS5.
Oh yeah, and I think that the sales numbers will tell you that it sold very well on the PlayStation 5.
It certainly has. When I was going through this, we'll come on to some of the areas where we think things need to improve, but I put together two lists basically. And in terms of what's been successful and where improvements need to be made, the PlayStation had the biggest discrepancy for me, because it does feel to me like the games are far and away the thing that makes that a console worth buying and investing in now, but there are a lot of kind of smaller quality of life things that I would quite like to see happen to catch up in certain senses with the Xbox. But when you look at it the other way around, Xbox has this one big problem to my mind, which is that it just doesn't have the games that the PlayStation has to offer at the moment. And we were talking about this a lot before the launch, Mark, and particularly when Halo Infinite got delayed. But we are 6 months in now, and the Medium is still pretty much the only major kind of exclusive game that I can think of on the Xbox, and that didn't review very well.
No, it didn't. But interestingly, I think that Xbox are doing a sort of pseudo-exclusive thing with Games Pass these days, thinking specifically about Outriders. Although it came out on PlayStation, in fact, even thinking about The Show, which came out on Xbox and on PlayStation and was developed by PlayStation, it was still significantly better value for money to play it on Xbox than it was to play it on PlayStation. So although these games are available on PlayStation, due to the value for money that you get in Games Pass, they sort of almost like Microsoft get all the headlines from it.
Yeah.
You know, like they get all the headlines from Outriders. But in terms of units sold, and again, I'm not one to get into this too much, but the PlayStation 5 has outsold the Xbox probably by a relatively notable margin worldwide. However, I reckon that the numbers will be very close on Outriders just because of the sort of game that it is, the sort of service that Games Pass is, and the value discrepancy in buying it on PlayStation 5 or playing it as part of your Games Pass subscription. And I think that we could see that a lot more going forward from Xbox. So they are definitely leveraging Games Pass as hard as they can in the face of these PlayStation exclusive games, which are very expensive to buy still, but they are drawing a huge amount of people to the platform at the same time, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, yeah, Game Pass is the killer app for Xbox. I think if you removed Game Pass from the Xbox offering, we would be having an extremely different conversation here in all sorts of ways.
Jesus Christ, yes.
and so, you know, it can't really be overstated how important that is to what Xbox is doing. But it's not the only thing I think that there's been success around on the Xbox side. I mean, things like FPS Boost, which we've seen in the last few weeks. Yep. I mean, there was a huge, was it 72 games or something that got FPS Boost just a week ago?
I believe, yeah, and that brings it up to, I can't remember what it was like 98 or 99 or something like that, so nearly 100 games that are backwards compatible with the Series X, which is basically everything, now support this FPS Boost, which is a huge thing going forward. You know what I mean? This was one of the things that was touted so highly for the consoles going forward, was the increased frame rate that we were going to see on consoles that would be rivaling PC, and the fact that Xbox have really leaned into that. Genuinely, I think that's great.
I totally agree. I mean, it brings so much more value and quality to some of the older games, which, basically is the proposition from Xbox just now. You can play third-party games and you can play older games, but we'll make those older games, including some third parties, look really astonishing. I mean, you chuck in things then like how much more simple smart delivery on Xbox has been than the PS4 to PS5 upgrade system, which is ad hoc and completely different per game and a bit of a mess a lot of the time.
Yep.
And also when you take in things like Xbox's slightly more official quick resume feature. PlayStation does have a quick resume, but it only works for one game at a time, it seems like, whereas I think even just in the last 24 hours Xbox has had another update so that quick resume now shows you all of the games that are in a suspended state and you can switch between them a bit more easily. So it's really things like that, I think, that make the Xbox a really good proposition just now, even without the games, that you're looking at it and just thinking it's a UI that they've been building on for an entire generation. It's basically the same UI as the Xbox One generation. They've added all these really exciting quality of life improvements that make all of your gaming sort of better, but if you are just willing not to have loads of exclusive new big shiny games, that's the trade-off you're making there. A lot of those things is kind of where I would like to see improvement on the PlayStation side in the next 6 months or the next 6 years, really. It's just getting a little bit closer to how slick it seems like the Xbox can be.
I do have to say this up front, the Xbox UI is dreadful. However, the functionality is incredible.
Yeah,
that is what I'll say. The functions that the Xbox has on their software side and their services, quality of life stuff, I really like a lot of what they're doing. I genuinely do. I mean, it just comes down to games. It really does. And with the acquisition of all these studios that they bought, and then on top of that, the Bethesda purchase, which is obviously huge, you can't help but think that they are going to catch up to Sony on that exclusives front. However, I'm not entirely confident that PlayStation are going to catch up to Xbox on the services front.
I think that's a really fair comment. Yeah, I would worry that they won't get there, or at least won't get there for quite some time. It doesn't feel like PlayStation quite feels the same urgency. We know that Xbox are buying up studios and they have announced a lot of games. They just haven't arrived yet. I mean, you can see list after list of quite exciting Xbox games that are on the horizon. Not a lot of really massive things, to be fair, but enough that I think that plus the proposition of Game Pass and the increasing likelihood that a lot of new games are going to come to Game Pass day and date going forward, that does kind of make it really exciting going forward.
Well, I think Starfield and the new Elder Scrolls game count as pretty massive to me, man.
Yeah, coming up, exactly. There's stuff like that. There's Fable, there's Perfect Dark.
Oh, Perfect Dark.
But a lot of them are quite a ways away in terms of, what Xbox were showing off last summer, this time last year or whatever. It was a lot of smaller games that all look interesting in their own way, but aren't, world beaters. I think what we'll see at E3 this year, or in some of the other showcases throughout the rest of the year, is basically Xbox lining up their 2022 to 2024 slate as being really substantial. But in the next year, the next 12 months, Xbox won't do a hell of a lot except Halo Infinite that is of that kind of scale,
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't disagree, man. Definitely.
Just while we're on those games then, so neither of us have really made a huge effort to buy an Xbox thus far. I was really interested in getting a Series S quite early, but so far, basically, there has been no real reason to go and not even spend the money, but make the effort joining those goddamn queues to try and get one online. If there was one game that could make you go instantly, I have to go and buy an Xbox now, what do you think it would be from everything that we know's coming?
Oh, that's a good question. Nice one. Congratulations on your good question, Lloyd. I'm not at all trying to draw this out so that I can think.
He's vamping.
I'm not sure. Basically, I think that the answer for most people to this question is Halo. I'm not sure that that's going to be the answer for me because I don't have the history with that franchise, Although I'm very, very keen to go back and play the Master Chief Collection, I really am, and just literally systematically go through all the Halo games. Beyond that, I'm quite interested to see what comes of Fable. I'm obviously interested in whatever new Fallout game comes out, whatever new Elder Scrolls game comes out, whatever's coming out of Arcane, whatever's coming out of id. You know what I mean? I think to me, it'll probably be something from the Bethesda side that first draws me into Xbox as, yes, this is the one for me. Lewis, I'm going to flip it around on you. Now your turn.
Well, I've had all this time to think. So, I mean, yeah, I would agree with quite a number of those. I'm quite excited to see what happens with Avowed. Fable
great shout. Yeah. Oh, in fact, Lewis, I've just thought of it. I've just thought of it.
Go on.
It's Hellblade 2, isn't it?
Yeah, that's where I was going to land.
Yes, it's Hellblade 2. Of course it is. That will be it for me, yeah.
If that lives up to the promise that it could have, the scope that they could expand that game to, I think it could be really, really exciting. So I just wanted to bring that question up because it is basically... If the games had been there from day one, I think the toss-up between the two might actually lie slightly closer with Xbox because it does have Game Pass and it does have slightly better quality of life features going on there. But at the moment, the PlayStation's offering in terms of games, and still in the months to come, never mind the first 6 months, but in the months to come, there's even more really exciting stuff, starting with Ratchet & Clank, obviously. I've got one final question for you, I think. You know, and you can take this as far wide as you want to go with it, but in your first 6 months with these next generation consoles, what is the best game that you've played on that machine?
Interesting. Are we talking just in general? My favourite game that I've played on the PS5?
It could be either. I mean, I guess the reason I'm asking that is because if you don't pick either a PS5 exclusive or a Sony game, then it says that there's still more interesting development happening elsewhere, potentially, for you at least.
Well, I went back and played a lot of older games, to be fair. Mm-hmm. Persona 5 sticking out hugely here, of course. But I think, like, what is the actual best game that I played? Honestly, it was probably Demon's Souls. Probably Demon's Souls, which, to be fair, was brilliant. Like, I don't know why I'm like, oh yeah, it was probably, as if that is some negative. No, Demon's Souls was excellent and I really, really enjoyed playing it. It just seems to be like the obvious answer for some reason. Oh, as well, Spider-Man. Jesus, Spider-Man was incredible. Yeah, Spider-Man Miles Morales was incredible as well, yeah, definitely.
Yeah, those two stand out massively. I'd be really keen to see in a couple of weeks where Returnal kind of sits on that list as well.
Me too.
You've got Astro's Playroom, which was obviously a really major thing so at the launch.
Oh, that was great. Yeah, that was really good.
I think for me, in terms of full kind of PS5 experiences, in that I played the PS5 version, not that it's not available on other consoles, Hitman 3 is probably still my most favourite game that I've played since getting a PS5. But yeah, Spider-Man in particular, as much as it was a shorter game than the original, Miles Morales was just so full of character, so full of heart, and really showed off some of what the PlayStation could do, and it sounds like we're getting more of that with Returnal, so that's probably up there for me. But as much as we keep saying PlayStation has the games, I still think even with that lineup that we've gone through, there's so much better and bigger to come, and that is what's really exciting about next gen.
Yeah, I think that really, with PlayStation, the big heavy hitters are still to come. I'm really, really interested in what Ratchet & Clank is doing, actually, although that's not necessarily a visual showcase in terms of its graphics, but at the same time, it absolutely is. Do you know what I mean? Like, every time I see Ratchet & Clank, I'm like, Jesus Christ, this looks absolutely stunning for what it is. Not photorealism, I suppose, that's what I'm trying to get at, right? I was very interested to see what Returnal was doing in terms of next gen, but really, what we are looking forward to as PlayStation fans here, I think, is we want to see what Horizon Zero Dawn is doing, and we want to see what God of War Ragnarok is going to be doing with these next gen consoles, because they are... I mean, as much as it's probably true to say that Returnal and Ratchet & Clank are AAA games, like Horizon Zero Dawn and God of War specifically, like, exist on a different plane from those games, you know what I mean? So that is really, really what I want to see show off this hardware, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, those are the killer apps going forward. Again, if we're seeing Returnal leverage some of the features of the new console and the DualSense right now, let's wait and see what the bigger studios, the big boys, can do with it. I think that is going to be a real big moment. So 6 months from now, we might have even more to say on the first year of these consoles.
I'm sure we'll do a look back in the year list. I'm sure we will. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we'll have to call it a day there. I'd like to remind everyone that you can find PlayersToo on all the social media. That's Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, the lot. You can also find our written content over at PlayersToo.com. That's PlayerStoo.com. And if you could take 5 seconds to give us 5 stars over on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your podcasts, it really, 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 really helps us out. I know I say it twice a week, every week, but it does not become less important on a weekly basis. Thank you so much to anyone that's already done that for us. And it genuinely does only take you 5 seconds, and it means so much to us. But thank you all the same for taking time out of your lives to give us a little review. It genuinely does mean a lot. I'd like to remind everyone that our play-along game for this month is Katana Zero, which, Lewis, as a shock to everyone, I've already completed.
Nice one, yeah. I mean, we'll save your full thoughts for the start of next month, but...
Yes, we will, not saying a word.
Not even stimmen. Well, yeah, I've already played it a wee while ago. I'm going to go back and play it again. Yeah, well, we had a little exchange off air, and I think it's going to be a good discussion when we get there, so do definitely play along with us.
Definitely. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you next week.
Thanks.